Alright dudes, episode 5, starting with combat today. We probably will not get it completed in one episode, but we will get like a very basic setup, hopefully with one enemy and one actor attack up and running. I think along with that, what I wanted to point out before we start is that I have uploaded the project to itch. Now it is not a project you can open and look through, but it's a project that you can play along with. So every time I release an episode, what we're going to do is we're going to update the project on itch, and you guys will be able to play along to the point where that tutorial is developed. Compare it to your own projects, see if there's anything you like, anything you don't like. You know, you might like different speeds, stuff like that, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so to start with, what we need to do is we need to create our animations, and we've been through this before, but you'll see here I created an animation called Trust Attack, and it just does this, whomp. It's like a few frames and just shows them like throwing out the sword. And I also created one called Slash. Slash is the one that we'll be using for today, and this is exactly what you think it is. He just goes whomp. Okay, so the next thing we need to discuss is how do attacks work in Action Game Maker, and this is like super important. So basically you'll see every time you create a 2D actor, he'll have an attack area 2D, and inside that will be a collision box, and this collision box is when this overlaps the enemy, this is what does the damage. And they'll also have a hit area 2D, and this is pretty much a hurt box. So basically when the actor's attack collision from his attack area 2D overlaps the enemy's hit area 2D hit collision, then he will do damage. We will get to explain how to create this in 1 second, but for now I'm just going to show you how it actually works in the game. So what you'll see is we're here in game, right? And the teal colored boxes here, these are collision boxes, and the blue ones are hurt boxes, right? And this is the player's attack box, and you see the enemy's attack box on the enemy right there. So what's happening right now is the player's attack is disabled, but when I press the button to attack, you see how it flashes red? That's when I've enabled the hitbox. So it only does damage when that's enabled and overlapping the blue box of the enemy. So for example, I'll walk up here and we hit him, see? So if this box is overlapping, and that's exactly how we want this to work. Hitbox overlaps hurtbox. Names are kind of confusing, but you will get it down eventually. But hitbox overlaps hurtbox, does damage. In our animation player, you'll notice that if we play the animation, this hitbox moves, okay? And that looks pretty good. So what I've done here is the exact same way you keyframe frames with your Sprite 2D, by like clicking on the texture and keyframe all this. What I've done is I've keyframed my attack area 2D. So you'll see right here, attack area 2D has its own bunch of tracks. And I've keyframed rotation. Let me get a better view on this. Okay. And you'll see I've keyframed rotation, position, and scale. So for example, the box starts out like this. It can be anywhere here because the box is not actually being used. Then it goes to here. And you'll see I put the box right over the sword. And I've done that by moving rotation. And again, to do that, you just click on attack 2D. And you've got transform here. And you will just use keyframes to make this follow the sword. So then you'll see on the next frame, I've got a following the sword a bit of leeway to give the player a swing. And then on the next frame, I've got it again, an extra bit of space. And over here finally we've got it resetting to a fairly neutral position. Now there's a couple of ways we can make this box actually do damage. You'll notice this is not turning red, and I'll explain why when we get to setting up our states and stuff in our player visual script. So let's take a look at our visual script, and all that's needed to do a single attack. So first off, when can we attack? Well, we can attack if we're running, or we can attack if we're idle. So that's pretty simple. We just created shortcuts. You'll see these little icons here that say shortcuts. We've been through how to do this before. You right click on it and you click to make a shortcut. Then I created a new state. So let's just do this again. Make a shortcut. Boom. And make a shortcut. Boom. Then we want the new state, which is our attack state. So let's add state. Let's call it attack. This is all we have to do. I'll just call it attack B because we're making it. And we want it to finish in idle. So again, shortcut from idle to idle. And we go here. So the animation we just created, this one here, which is our slash animation, I'm going to set that as our attack animation. Boom. Okay, that should be us good to go. And all we need to do then is to get from our attack back to idle. We'll add a link and we will use the finished animation condition right here. And then we only need to get our attack up and running. And to do this, again, like we do all the time, we create an input. You'll see down here I've got an input called light attack. And that's the F key on my keyboard or the square button on my controller, or X if it's an Xbox controller. So you just set that up as normal, and in here we just go add link. So the link is going to be trigger on input, input conditions, add condition, new input condition, and in here we set it to our light attack button, or whatever you name your attack button, and we just change it from being pressed to moment pressed. And now from idle we will go to this attack. So I'll disable the one I have currently. And we'll use this new one we created. So let's copy this link. And let's paste it in here. And if we test the game now, what will happen is it'll play the animation we just created. But you'll see that we won't actually get a hitbox. So we have a hitbox, sorry, we won't actually get the hitbox turning on. So we will not be able to do damage with this attack, even though we are overlapping. The enemy is just like, can't hit me. There's a couple of ways we can handle this. So the first way I'm going to show you to do this is that we're going to turn it on via an object property in our attack. So what we're going to say is that we're going to wait for like a few milliseconds. So in here, in our attack, we click actions. And we'll say we want to wait 0.15 of a second, right? Because I roughly know how long the animation is. And after 0.15 of a second, I'm going to say I want to change my object property. So change object property. And then in here, we're not changing a switch or a variable, we're changing an actual object property. And what we're going to find is that it's of myself, because it's basically in the player. And then in here, going to change player, and we're going to find the one that we want, which is our attack collision. So I'm going to find attack collision, and then inside attack collision I'm going to find disabled, and I'm going to set disabled to off, right? So basically I'm going to make sure that I don't tick this box. So what we're saying is the object property of the player called attack collision, disabled property, is equal to false. So that when it's false, you can actually turn the hitbox on. And then what we're going to do, we're going to put another wait. And we're going to say 0.1 seconds. And then we're going to change the object property again, and we're going to make it disabled again. So it can't like keep hitting or hitting through the players and whatever. And you won't get multi-hits, or you won't get anything really jank going on. So again, object property of myself, of the node attack collision, parameter is disabled, set to true. And so that's all we have to do, and now it'll turn on for us. One more thing I want to show you is that when I was setting this up originally, in here in attack collision, this is the parameter that we're turning on and off with our thing, disabled. So make sure you set that to true from the start, because if it's not true from the start, you'll see what happens here. So as you can see, when it's not true from the start, my attack box is always on. So it'll only turn off if I swing, but I can actually damage the enemy like this, which is no good to anyone. So you need to make sure that you go in here and you find this disabled inside the attack collision, click on this node, you find disabled, and you set it to on. Basically, it's disabled until we press the button, and 0.15 seconds after we press the button, it becomes undisabled, and then 0.1 second after that again, it becomes disabled again. So now what you'll see happens is when we test it in game, we move about, we press F, and you'll see it flashes on for a second. So now we can actually damage the enemy, once we set the enemy up, of course. But now I'm going to show you the second way to do this, and I prefer this way personally. So let's have a look at this. What we're going to do is we're not going to get into all these switches and variable tracking and all this stuff going on in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of these. So we're back to pretty much fresh, and we're going to do this in our animation player. So we click on animation player for the player, and remember what I said about keyframing everything? That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to click on my attack collision, and right here on the first frame, what I'm going to say is I'm going to look for disabled. Here it is. I'm going to say on the first frame, and this is just like a fail-safe. We're going to set disabled to on. So just make sure it says disabled and on, and we'll double click. So we don't need a reset track. Boom. And then what we want to do is right when we want the sword to start doing damage. So again, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm just going to check this out. And we don't really want it doing damage here because it's up in the air. But I think here, when this one is on, this is a good spot to actually start doing damage. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to set this to off. You see it's gone red. And I'll keyframe it. And you'll see down here, disabled, you can see that it's off. And then we want it to stay on for, maybe that's too short, let's go maybe to a point like here, right? Actually, we'll go all the way to here, to this last frame. And then we'll turn it off again. So basically, to turn it off, we have to turn the disable switch on. So like that. So now you'll see what happens is when I play the animation, it's not red, it is red. And that's much easier because you can see when it's turning on and off in the actual animation player, which I personally like more than doing it through object properties in the visual script. Now, there is one more thing we want to do if we are doing it this way, right? What we want to do just to make sure is in all of our other animations, we want to make sure that we're turning it off. So I'm just going to go to attack collision at the start of my run animation. I'm going to find my disabled. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it for all of these animations. So what if we want to combo attacks? Let's think about that for a second. I have this nice thrust attack, right? Which looks like this. Boom. Very cool. And we're going to do the same thing again for turning on and off our attack collision. So you'll see it starts disabled. And at a certain point we want to enable it. So let's say maybe we'll start it here, right? And you can see we've already fallen behind the sword because of how the animation works. But in real time you'll see that it's pretty much unnoticeable. So right here, again, we'll go to our attack collision and we'll turn disabled to false. Let me just type it in here. And we'll keyframe it in. And then right here, there'll be a point where we want to turn it off, right? So we have this thrust reaching out, and right here, we'll turn disabled back to true. Our little icon is here, which means we're good. So now when we play it, what will happen is, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so how are we going to handle this in our visual script? Well, this is pretty simple. All we want to do is we want to get this guy in here, right, in between our attack and our idle. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this link first off, so we have a way to come out of thrust attack into idle. So all we're left with now is to find how to get from attack A to attack B. I'm going to add a link here. What I'm going to say is a couple of conditions. The first of which is going to be, and we can't use animation finished right here, okay? Because that won't work. Well, what we want to do, so we're going to go in here to conditions, and we do have an animation finished right here. And we are going to use this one, and the reason being is we want another condition with that, which is going to be our input was triggered, and the input triggered we're looking for is our attack button again. Here we are, light attack. And we're going to go moment pressed. Now, so what's going to happen now if we were to run the game like this is exactly when you have one frame to press the button exactly as the animation finishes, which is almost impossible timing wise for you to trigger your combo. That's no good to anyone. So again, in their logic, Gotcha Game said we're going to use acceptable frame count, just like we used for the jump. So we know that our original animation for our original attack, right here, is 0.5 frames long, so half a second, or 0.5 seconds long. So in here in our thrust attack, we want to give enough frames for the player to have time to press the input, but also that it doesn't overlap where this input for this first condition goes here. So if we were to set the action, where am I going? If we were to set the input condition, acceptable frames 30 would be half a second. What would happen here is we would press this button and this attack would happen, but it would immediately trigger this attack as well, which would be kind of janky. So you'd only have to press the button once and it would do this attack, it would wait the time, and then it would do this attack as well. So that's no good, that's not what we want. And also if we were to make this too short, it would be kind of like 5 frames. It would be super hard for the player to find this. So what we want to do here is we want to set this to maybe 25 frames, so just less than half a second. So this input will not trigger this, and we have loads of time during this animation to press the button again to trigger our second attack. Is in here and satisfies any of, we need to change this to satisfies all. So it needs to read the button input and it needs to read the condition, not either or. Because both of these are running at exactly the same time when the animation finishes, right? You have this one that goes across the idle, and this is if the animation is finished, and you have this one that's if the button is pressed and the animation is finished. But the engine cannot differentiate between them, so it's probably going to pick the one that runs quickest, which will be this bottom one. So that means it's going to do this one and go to idle even if you're pressing the button when the time finishes or you've queued up the button. So what we have to do is we have to give priority to the link and the condition that we value the most. So it will be like if you were doing code and you were writing a bunch of if conditions, it will be the top one. So all we do for that is we click on this link, and right here in priority we can set this one to 5, and we can set this one to 1, and everybody knows 5 is greater than 1, so this one should have priority. So we're in game, I press F once. The attacks, I press F twice, 1, 2. So now we can hit this guy twice like this. And our attack is completely set up. So that's great and all. We've got an attack set up, but we can't attack anything because you guys have no enemies, whereas I do. So let's set up our first enemy. We're only going to set up a placeholder enemy that doesn't move, but we'll get that set up for you guys, and then in the next episode we'll start adding the enemy logic and AI. I dragged in a graphic here for an enemy, and we're just going to use this one real quick to set this guy up. So in our enemies folder, which we will create, we'll create a new folder, and we'll call this, I'm just going to call it test enemy 2. For you guys it'll be test enemy 1 or whatever you want in here. And what would happen is we would take this and we would drag it into this folder, this image from outside. So we've got an image we want to use. So this is super easy. All we want to do here is we want to create a new game object. I'm going to choose game object. I'm going to call this guy test enemy. In my case again I'll be calling him test enemy 2, just to make it easier for you guys. And we're going to make him of type character, and object group we're going to make him enemy. Now I'm going to talk a bit about groups in a second, so for now just bear with me. We're not going to touch any of this stuff for now, and we're going to create. So with it created, we obviously want to save them, so let's save the scene as, let's save it in enemies, let's save it in test enemy 2. Let's click save, and this is exactly, you'll notice, like how we set up our player. So in here in test enemy 2 we have all the usual things, and there's a lot of stuff we're not going to use, like we're not going to use the attack area 2D just for now. So we're going to turn off his attack collision, and to do that we do the exact same thing when we go to disabled. And we are going to set up our sprite 2D. So we just go to sprite 2D, let's look at our 2D view, and you'll notice this is blank. So over here in our texture we pull this guy over like so, and we'll get this. Now we're not going to deal with his animation player today, just for peace of mind and to get things done much quicker. So in here in our sprite 2D we know that this is 6 by 1 frames, so again in our animation we can set this to 6, we can set this to 1, and we only have the 1 going on, and then we just need to line things up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with my collision shape, and this is for our collision box, and just drag this onto him and resize it. So with our collision box done, I'm going to go to our hit area 2D, and I'm going to do the same thing with our hit collision. So our hit collision and our collision are pretty much the exact same size. They're pretty much only covering the sprite. That's all we need for now. So now we're going to talk about collision layers. So I'm going to click on my player first to show you how these work. So inside the player here, if I click on player, you'll see down here under collision we have 2 and 1. So we're going to set up our layers right now. If we just click over here on these 3 dots, we can actually start naming layers, right? Edit layer names. And what we're going to do is we're going to edit the layer names. For each layer we're going to have a layer for the player, a layer for the player attack, a layer for the player hurt box, and the same for enemies, and so on. You'll notice that Godot has these layers split into groups of 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the first 8 for the player, and the second 8 for enemies, and then the third 8 might be for something else. So let's set them up like that. So let's say layer 1 is our player collision layer. You don't need to put layer. Layer 2 will be our player attack layer. So this will be the layer on which the player spawns attacks, right? Layer 3 will be our player hurt box layer. This is the layer on which the player can get hurt. And then we're going to jump all the way to 9 for the next group box. And we're going to see this is the enemy collision layer. Then we're going to have the enemy attack layer. And then we're going to have the enemy hurt box layer. So you can see where I'm going with this. It makes it easier to manage things and not have collisions multiply triggering or going crazy. So basically we're going to allow this layer, layer 1, to bump into layer 9. Then we're going to only allow layer 2 to only interact with layer 11. And layer 10 to only interact with layer 3. So we close this up quickly and let's set our player collision. So in our player we know that we set the player layer to layer 1, player collision. That's fine. This is the layer you're on, the one that says layer, and the mask is the one you can interact with. So we want the player to interact first of all with layer 1. And the reason we want them to interact with his own layer is because this is also the layer where we're going to have our tiles. But we also want him to be able to collide with enemies, so we can't pass through them. So we're going to set him to interact with layer 9 as well. So we mask layer 1 and layer 9, and he only stands on layer 1. So that's good, that's exactly what we want. Then in the player attack settings, what layer did we say the player is going to do damage on? Well, now we can set these correctly as well, a little bit more polished. So the player's attack spawns on layer 2, and it crosses the enemy hurt box, which is layer 11. So having these names, you don't have to go looking for this in here, which makes things a lot easier. Finally, on the player, we're going to set up his hit area 2D, or his hurt box, as I feel like this should be named, but it is what it is. So we're just going to go to collision again, collision object 2D, and we're going to say the player's hurt box is on the layer for the player hurt box, and the player hurt box can take damage from the enemy attack layer. So now we need to do the same for the enemy, and I am sorry if this is dragging on, but I really want to make sure you guys get this right, because this is where I get so many questions about like, oh, my attack's not hitting the enemy, or the enemy is walking through me, and stuff like that. So we do have to have this spot on. So that's why I'm taking my time, why I'm going slow, and why we're doing it like this. So in our enemy layer, we just go and click on test enemy, and again we open up our collisions, and we're going to say the enemy is on the layer 9. We know that because that's in here as our enemy collision, and the enemy can collide with other enemies and with player collision, but he can't collide with any hurt boxes because this is his collision box, not his actual hurt box or his attack box or anything like that. So this is set. Then the enemy's hit area 2D, where can the enemy take damage from? Let's pop this open again. The enemies, we want him to take damage through his hurt box there, and we want him to receive damage from the mask. So what layer can this layer see? From the player attack. And then for his attack area 2D, we want this to be the enemy attack layer, and we want it to overlap the player hurt box. So I hope all that makes sense. It's super important, but I will say if there's one part of this video you're going to watch multiple times, it's that part. It is so important. In our test enemy, we're going to add a visual script. Add script, visual script, and we all know this is how Action Game Maker works. And what we're going to say here is we're just going to call this one idle. And we're not going to set any animations simply because we haven't set up any animations. And what should happen because we haven't set up any animations is it should use the default sprite 2D that we have set in here and not actually go looking for this animation player or anything like that. What we're going to do, we're going to quickly drag the enemy we just created, the .tscn, which is a scene. I'm going to pull him into our level, pop him in, and make sure that he's on the same object root on the same layer as the player. So that way the player can interact with him. So now on the enemy, let's do some settings. So what we're going to do to start off with is we've got all this set up. We're going to go to base settings, and we're just going to give him a HP amount, and let's just set his HP to 5. Okay, and he's got 5 HP. His current HP is clamped to his max HP. His attack stuff doesn't matter for now. We'll make him blink when he takes damage, and we'll make him be invincible for like 0.5 frames. Make him blink for like 0.1. And when he runs out of HP, we'll remove him from the game, just as a quick test. Okay, so as you can see in the game now, I'm moving about, I press attack, we can't hit him, we can't collide with him. I press attack, and we hit him and he dies. So that's all exactly what we want. Depending on how we tweak our numbers and how we tweak our stuff, then it will change like how many hits it takes to kill him. So for example, he's got 5 HP, and our player has an attack value of 3, so 2 hits should kill him. Whereas if we set our player's attack value to 1, then it should take 5 hits to kill him. So let's check this out. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he's gone. Okay, perfect. That is the basics of an attack system. That is how we're going to approach this going forward. And if you guys are liking the tutorials, please by all means click subscribe and leave comments and feedback, and the more interaction it gets, the more likely I am to keep making these videos, but also the better it is for the YouTube algo, and the more likely it is to push this stuff to other people. Lastly, I feel like I'm begging now, but lastly, I am running a Kickstarter eventually for my game, but what I'm trying to do right now is build followers for my JRPG Lul and the Liar of Two Worlds. So if you guys would check that out on Kickstarter and give it a follow, I don't expect any money or backing or anything like that, but just the numbers from followers and stuff encourages other people to back when the time is right. So if you guys could do that, I'd super appreciate it. Game's also on Steam if you want to give it a wish list, but I feel like a telemarketing guy or something now, so I'm going to stop. So till next time, enjoy the tutorial. I hope you're really enjoying Action Game Maker. It's quite good so far, and peace.